Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will call the meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see council members in the chamber tonight. Councillor Thompson hopefully will be along shortly, and Councillor Pringle has indicated he's on his way to the council chambers, which is great. I'll start off by reading the land acknowledgement statement. We acknowledge with respect the history, spirituality, and culture of the Anishinaabe, the people of the three fires known as Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations who have inhabited this land from time immemorial. And further give thanks to the Chippewa Saugeen, the Chippewa Nawash, now known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, as the traditional keepers of this land. We also recognize the Métis and Inuit whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. May we all, as treaty people, live with respect on this land and in peace and friendship with all its diverse people. Moving on to the agenda, does anyone have anything to add to our agenda here tonight? Seeing none, the recommendation is that the council agenda be approved as presented. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Coburn, second by Councillor Barfoot. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Seeing none, show of hands, all in favor? Opposed? None? It was carried. Declaration of peculiar interest, you can declare anytime you see fit during the meeting. We're down to announcements. It gives me great pleasure to make this announcement. On behalf of myself and council, congratulations to Walker Aggregate Sutherland Quarry for their receipt of the OSSGA 2021 Community Relations Reward. This award recognizes their wide range of activities that contribute to progressive image of aggregate producers and the aggregate industry as a whole, including promoting operations that go above and beyond what is required by legislation. In addition to the Community Relations Award, Walker Aggregate Sutherland Quarry was also awarded the Property Enhancement, which recognizes opportunities best practice as a site entrance and throughout the broader quarry site. Congratulations to Walker Aggregate. Keep up the good work. We have no public hearings here tonight, no delegations, no correspondence. We are down to staff reports. The first one is the zoning bylaw amendment application Z16 by Abbas Carmela be converted to an existing garage into one-story secondary dwelling unit be approved, and that the amending bylaw prohibit short-term vacation rentals within the secondary dwelling unit. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, second by Deputy Mayor Carlton. Senior Planner, Jen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So as the report notes, this application was presented to Council on January 19th, and the proposal is to permit a secondary dwelling unit in a detached garage. And the reason why the application comes before Council is because the location of that existing garage is in front of the house and it doesn't meet the requirements of the bylaw. So at the public meeting, we did hear concerns through written comments from a neighbor that the unit would be used for short-term vacation rental accommodation. When we look at the application, the property owner applied for a secondary dwelling unit. And just to ensure that the property is used as a secondary dwelling unit, there is the opportunity or the option for Council to approve a bylaw that clearly identifies the permitted use of the property and to scope the size of the secondary dwelling unit so that it effectively remains secondary to the main residential dwelling on the property. So as you can see on the second page of the report under conclusion and recommendation, I have put an excerpt from the amending bylaw that's been drafted for this application to limit the the size of the secondary dwelling unit to approximately 71 square meters, which is what was applied for. And to note that short-term vacation rental accommodation is prohibited within the secondary dwelling unit. That will serve to permit the unit to be rented out for long-term housing accommodation, which is what the intent of secondary dwelling units is. So just as the application as presented is consistent with the provincial policy statement, the county official plan, and the Township of Georgian Bluffs zoning bylaw. And the recommendation is to approve the application. Just so council is aware, I have noted in the report, there is no appeal mechanism for on a bylaw that authorizes a secondary dwelling unit, just so that council is aware of that tonight. So the bylaw is scheduled for the next council meeting, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Madam Planner. Does council have any questions on this application? Deputy Mayor Carlton, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am in favor of this. I think secondary dwelling units are a good thing, but I question, how will we know if it's being used as a short-term rental, and what would we do if we did find out? Like, I guess I question why put that in there. Thank you.
Jen, can you answer that?
So we would only know if we received a complaint from a resident, and it's the same as the other bylaw enforcement complaints that we receive. And if it's in the bylaw, then we would have the power to enforce that because the property would be in contravention of the zoning.
Thank you, Jen. Councilor Barfoot, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Jen. I might as well voice my opinion right off the bat. I'm opposed to this. This party has owned this property, I think he said, for 8 months, and he's rented it out for 5 months, and already we're getting complaints from the neighbors of trespassers. I want to know, has the chief building official done an inspection on this? Like, you know, we're talking wells and septics here. We're not just talking where you're hooking onto a sewer system. We are not equipped to police or govern bed and breakfast. There are municipalities all across Ontario that are having problems. We live hits close to home, and it's a relative that doesn't go home from a bed and breakfast. We've got to have mechanisms in place to protect not only the neighbors, but we do not have stuff in place at this time, I don't think, to allow bed and breakfast or any short-term rental in an area like that. I can't oppose it strongly enough. Pick up the paper every day and you'll see where other municipalities are having major problems. And you got to stop and remember, folks, this also affects our policing budget.
Thank you, Councilor Barfoot, for your comments. Welcome, Councilor Pringle. We are on our first planning issue. Does council have any other questions on the motion before us here tonight? See none. Councilor Barfoot, please go ahead.
I should point out to council, I've been receiving correspondence from a ratepayer up at the north end in the municipality for probably 3 years now that has a bed and breakfast next to her. She said it's not safe to let your kids out in the weekend to play because you don't know who's living next door. So there are ratepayers out there that are watching how we handle this. So we better be very, very cautious. We're here to represent our ratepayers.
Thank you, Councilor Barfoot. Councilor Colburn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I wonder if I might ask our planner a question about this.
Please go
Councillor
ahead.
Colburn, sorry if I can interrupt. Can you pull your microphone out a little bit?
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So Jen, you're saying that within this approval, there'll be a provision that short-term accommodation is not going to be allowed. Do we have definitions for what short-term is versus a long-term rental? And what do we have in place in terms of property standards bylaws that would address this?
Jen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council. We don't have a licensing program for short-term accommodation right now. With this site-specific bylaw, it prohibits short-term vacation rental accommodation. So if it's listed on the VRBO or Airbnb website, then it's in contravention of the zoning bylaw.
Go ahead, Councilor Colburn.
Thank you, Jan, and I do understand that. I think, though, a lot of times short-term accommodations or short-term rentals can be quite successful just by word of mouth. And so I'm wondering how we're going to be able to identify this if should it become a problem, and how are we going to deal with it with our existing by law enforcement?
Jen, are you able to answer that or not?
Well, it's similar to the other complaints that we receive. So each complaint is assessed on a case-by-case basis, and we would look at what the applicable zoning provision is, just like for any property that we receive a complaint, and we look at the nature of the complaint. So if the activity at the site has to do with noise or garbage, our noise bylaw, the complaint could be addressed through the noise bylaw or property standards complaint. For this specific property, if they are operating a short-term rental, vacation rental accommodation in that unit, then the township would be able to act on it, and we would charge them for contravening the zoning bylaw, and it would become a bylaw enforcement process dealt with by our bylaw enforcement team. We can't go out and we can't assume that every application we have is going to contravene the zoning bylaw or our bylaws. The property owner has applied for a secondary dwelling unit, and within the policies put forward by the province and the county, it's a permitted use. So what we are doing by scoping the site-specific zoning is ensuring that it's used for a residential purpose, and it's not being rented out commercially for profit.
Thank you, Jen. Councilor Barfoot, did I see your hand up?
I guess I could beat this one to death. It's interesting. It's like being on a merry-go-round. Here we go around and around and around. He verbally admitted, and we have it on tape, that his intentions were he was going to use it. He was going to rent it out to friends and relatives. So what more proof do we need than he admitted to us? I asked him how long he'd owned the property, and I think he said 8 months. And he'd rented it out 5 months, 5 of those 8 months. Does that not put a red flag up and say, you better be careful on this one?
Thank you for your comment, Councilor Barfoot. Councilor Pringle, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Apologies for being late there too. I guess my opinion on it is too. I don't have an object, or I don't have a reason not to go with a secondary dwelling if that's what it's going to be. But yeah, all the information that we received from the gentleman wasn't leaning that direction at all. I also kind of concur with Councillor Barfoot there that this is a tricky one for the fact that if he does go to his own idea of making an Airbnb and it's word of mouth or wherever it gets done and it is used that way, how are we going to enforce it? Are we going to be able to enforce it? Because if we don't enforce it with him, there's going to be how many others are going to happen. So I have no issue with the secondary dwelling piece, but if it's anything more than that, I have an issue.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle. Deputy Mayor, did I see your hand up?
I think there's two kind of different things here. He was talking about renting out the main house, which I don't think there's any way we can stop him from that because we have no restriction in the bylaw that stops him. But we can enforce that this stay a secondary dwelling unit. I guess my initial question was, as Councillor Pringle has said, how do we know that that's what they're doing? But if it's there and we get complaints, then we can act upon it. The secondary dwelling units, yes, the province and the county are pushing that we allow more of those so that there's more housing available. Thank you.
Thank you. Good comments. Councillor Barfoot?
Just to remind you, he did make the comment that he was renting it out as a weekend vacation property, so.
I heard that too, like
Yeah.
everyone else, but
So
again,
he's admitted already what his intentions are.
thank you, Councillor Barfoot. The intent of the application is that it's being rented as a secondary rental property. Until we find out differently, then we can act on it accordingly. I don't want more to say. I do agree. I sit on the housing committee of the county, and we are pushing like mad for secondary dwellings throughout Great County because of shortage of housing and so on. And this is a prime example that if it's rented out as a residence for somebody, that's what it's meant to be. But if it's if he's going against that original idea and starts trying to get short-term accommodations, then we'd have to deal with it when with the issue when it comes in. And I assume it would be complaint-based, Madam CEO or Clerk. I assume it would be Madam Planner. Would it be a complaint basis? That was how we'd have to.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that's correct.
Any comments, Madam CEO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I would concur with our senior planner, and I think she also indicated if we had proof through advertising the property that it was a short-term use, we could act upon it at that point as well.
Thank you. Councillor Barfoot, please go ahead.
Just one quick question. I'd asked if our chief building official had taken a good look at this, and will it even be acceptable to be used for that intended use?
Don't know who would answer that. I don't know, Madam Planner, are you able to answer that?
Yep. So what happens with the applications when they come in, they're circulated to the Building and Operations Department as well as the agencies. Typically, we get comments back from the Building Department if they see a red flag when it comes to the proposed development. So Tim and Luke will review the building plans to make sure that the proposed renovation of that garage is in accordance with the Ontario Building Code, as well as the septic design. And then they will address any servicing issues or building code issues at the time of a complete application. The property owner doesn't have plans, to my knowledge, because the application hasn't yet been approved. Moving forward to get design plans can be costly, and a lot of people, as part of their development process, don't get those detailed plans until they've actually received approval for the development.
Thank you, Jen. A question before I go to Councillor Sullivan on that same topic. Does that include the existing dwelling is on the property before, I'm not talking about the garage, I'm talking about the rental unit. Will it be checked out by our building department or no, to know if it's up to date now?
Oh, sorry. Mr. Mayor, the structure, the house right now, there is no trigger for us to investigate that structure. There's no identified building code issues. The converted garage will not be connected to the same septic system as that dwelling. It will have its own. So we haven't had a trigger or any reason to investigate the house from a building code perspective. The structure that the garage that will be converted, our building department will be on site and in that structure investigating it.
Yeah, I can understand that. That makes sense. Councillor Sutherland, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I'm curious to know, say we pass this hypothetically and with the amended part of the bylaw with the prohibited short-term vacation rentals, and we do catch the individual in the act, what happens then? Is there a charge or like, I'm curious to know is what the reprimand would be for that individual?
Yep.
I guess I turn to Jen first. Can you answer that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So through you to Councillor Sutherland and Council, we would follow the usual procedure. So the property owner, we would collect evidence and the property owner would be charged for contravening the provisions of the zoning bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Colburn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you to council, I think we all understand how frustrating this issue of short-term accommodations and short-term rentals, vacation rentals has been, not the least of which to our bylaw enforcement team. But I think this is a small example of a much bigger problem that we're going to have to deal with in a more comprehensive way down the road. And I know that some of us have been asking for that to happen. So perhaps we can. I don't know if we can vote down this approval based on the fact that someone might be in violation in the future. I'm not sure that seems right to me, and I don't know if we'd have a leg to stand on. I don't know if the senior planner would like to comment.
Jen, any comments on that comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Coburn is correct. In order to refuse a Planning Act application, there has to be a valid planning reason for refusing it. If the application is refused by council, you will need to specify your reasons because the recommendation is in the report is to approve the application for a secondary dwelling unit because it complies with the applicable policies. So presuming that someone is going to, and not just in this situation, but for other land uses in the township, operate in contravention of the bylaw is not a valid reason to refuse the application as presented.
Thank you, Jen. Councillor Barfoot, please go ahead.
I keep referring back to the verbal admission that he'd give to council, which is recorded. In all clear conscience, I cannot vote in favor of this because of what he admitted to council, what his intentions are. So you're sort of in a very precarious position here. But in all respect to the planner, I know you're following the rules and regulations, but I have to think of the ratepayers too, which have already spoke out against this. So, sorry folks, when somebody makes an admission like that in front of council, I think that carries a lot of weight.
Thank you, Councillor Barfoot. Welcome, Councillor Thompson. We've had a good discussion on this motion before us. Is there any other comments before I ask for the vote? Recorded vote's been asked for, Madam Clerk.
Just confirming there's no other comments prior to taking the vote.
I do not see any.
Okay, perfect. So when I call your name, please indicate your vote on the motion in question. Councillor Paul Sutherland,
4.
Councillor Barfoot,
Opposed?
Councillor Carol Barfoot, or Kathy Moore Coburn, sorry.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Grant Pringle,
4.
Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton,
4.
and Mayor Dwight Burley.
4.
Thank you, and that carries.
Okay. Okay, so we'll move on with our agenda then. Again, I think I did say welcome Councillor Thompson to the meeting.
Thank you again.
We're down to our next staff report is the clerk's department. I'll read the recommendation. The committee hereby supports continuing participation with the Bruce Peninsula Veterinary Service Committee and further the Veterinary Assistant Program, and that a member of council be appointed to the Bruce Peninsula Veterinary Service Committee. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Councilor Pringle, second by Councilor Thompson. I'm going to turn it over to Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So in brief summary for the report that you have in front of you this evening, in 2000, I guess I should say, 1992, former townships of Keppel and various townships of now Northern Bruce and Southern Bruce Peninsula formed to create this committee, being the Bruce Peninsula Veterinary Services Committee, by which is ran and funded by the province through various organizations. But essentially, I akin this committee to that of the Physicians Recruitment Committee, being that it works actively in all 3 communities that exist today, being Georgian Bluffs, Southern Bruce, and Northern Bruce, to ensure that local farmers, and specifically local large animal farmers, have access to veterinary services and consistent veterinary services throughout the region. So, as I mentioned in my report, the committee has not met in some time, and now all of the members are retiring their posts. So it has come to our attention that we now need to renew our appointments on this committee, and that is why I'm in front of you this evening to seek another appointee. I'm unsure what the meeting schedules will look like at this point or how demanding on time it will look like. I will say that this is not a requirement for the township to continue participation on this committee. So should you decide that you no longer wish to participate, you are not bound by legislation to do so. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I welcome council's comments or welcome an appointee to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The frustrating thing with this report is that I can remember many, many years ago when this committee was formed, we as a municipality really haven't had a member on it for a long, long time. I'm totally amazed. I don't really know what the committee is for. I think it's for larger animals to help the, I'm going to say, use the word farmers, but the people that house these bigger animals, I think it's for helping them. I don't know what the committee does to do that, so I'm a little lost at that. So I just put that out there. Is there any member of council who would like to sit on this committee? Deputy Mayor Carlton?
I would volunteer to go on it, and with the intent of going to a meeting to find out exactly what it is all about, and then bring back a report that maybe we could decide whether it's worth us staying involved or not. I think that would be the fair way to go, is to find out exactly what it is all about first.
I think it's a great suggestion if you're willing to do that. We paid a little over $1,600 for this committee for all those years, really not knowing what it's about. Councillor Sullivan, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. To council. So this is, I do actually know a little bit about this. Councillor Thompson will see this too when I farm, when I get a vet bill, it is extremely affordable compared to small animals, cats, dogs, etc. Vets come as we need them, usually within 30, 40, 50 minutes to respond to help us with whatever issues it is we need. But then they get, we pay a portion of it, and then the government, Ontario government, kicks in the remaining to help. You know, if you take, like, we use vets from Chatsworth. I'm sure Ryan does too, or Councillor Thompson. And you know, when they drive from Chatsworth to Campbell, Byerton, Tobermory, you can imagine that kind of a bill. It's surprisingly not that bad, but the government does help pay. I think they pay mileage, if I'm correct. Yeah, they pay the mileage. So it makes the bill very, you know, when you're paying a couple $100 or more for an animal that's only worth, you know, $1,000, and then it dies anyways, it kind of sucks. So this helps out. This committee, yes, they've been around for about 30 years now, I guess. So I would be willing to put my name forward too.
So, Councillor, before I go to Madam Clerk, Councillor Sutherland, I was hoping you guys would have a bit of experience with this, but what does the committee actually do to help your cause? That's the part I wonder. Councillor Thompson?
I remember this coming forward years ago. In fact, I had wondered recently when we had a vet out to the house because I hadn't seen any money. So I hadn't seen this come before council. When I remembered it was years ago, it really was a membership that we paid. And the Veterinary Association advised us that this membership does exactly what Councillor Sutherland is talking about. But I don't know that we ever had a representative. I don't think we did. I think we paid the fee and we never had a representative. And I think that
Madam Clerk, you probably can answer that.
Yes, I can. So a couple of comments. Our formerly appointed member was that of our former mayor, being Alan Bartlett. But as I say, the committee hasn't met formally since 2010, hence why we haven't had these discussions around the horseshoe. So, Mr. Mayor, I would echo the sentiments of the deputy mayor in that I think it would likely be beneficial to appoint someone, even if it was on an interim basis, to permit that kind of investigative work with the committee to determine if our continued membership on the committee is beneficial to the township. Further, if we do not participate in the committee, then the township is removed from the veterinary assistance program. So it is one and the same. If we want our local farmers to benefit from this program, then we do have to participate in the committee and allocate that annual fee.
And I agree with that. Councillor Sutherland, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just quick follow-up. So then the appointed member doesn't actually have to be on council after, like, if you know, something happens to get voted out or something, then would they still remain on?
So I think one of the first tasks that this committee will have is to update the terms of reference, being the constitution that I've appended to the report. Because you're correct, Councillor Sutherland, it's not specific in that the member appointed to the committee has to be an elected official. That is past practice, and that it was the recommendation of the retiring appointees on the committee that exists today. So I would suggest you're likely right. It does not need necessarily to be an elected official, but the terms of reference need to be updated to reflect that.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. In no way am I trying to offend the deputy mayor, because he does sit fairly close to me, but I'm just wondering, not knowing that much about the committee, a person that deals with this problem all the time, like a farmer, would they not be more experienced to sit on that committee to get a better handle on what's going on at the committee? Does that make sense? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I don't disagree with you. When I offered, it was more thinking who has more time. Councillor Sutherland's busy, so I was thinking if it was just that idea of getting the information to find out what this committee is, I would volunteer to do that. I have another question though, and that would be, does it only affect the section of Georgian Bluffs? It was the original township of Keppel. So does it affect the whole township now? Which means we're bringing in Derby and Sarawak as well. And would that warrant larger participation on it than one person?
Madam Clerk, please go ahead.
That's a great question. And part of updating those terms of reference that are very much out of date, I would say from a rationality perspective, yes, considering we're now amalgamated to create one larger township, but I think you're correct. It may warrant larger representation to match that of Northern and Southern Bruce Peninsula. But I'm not offering, but that terms of reference definitely needs to be updated for sure.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. It'd be nice to see when you get that terms of reference updated and bring it back to council. It'd be nice to see that. May I make a suggestion to council? Why don't we ask Councilor Sutherland and Deputy Mayor Carlton to go on that committee to get information on as appointed members for interim, and then bring it back to council. Then at that time, we might have a new terms of reference, and maybe we at that time could say, we only need one member, or we do need two members. It's just in case, for instance, if you can't attend the meeting, you can't attend the meeting, at least one of us would be there. But I'm just suggesting the two of us be appointed here tonight, just to attend the meeting, see what happens. Councilor Barfoot?
I just have a question and a statement. Why do we need two members to gather information? And secondly, I'd like to remind council that this has been going on ever since I've been on council, which is a couple days. And part of the problem was because they had problems getting veterinarians up in the north end of the township. And that's why it was initiated originally. So, you know, to me, that does more for our ratepayers. You know, we got it's sort of a veterinary recruitment committee, but we've also got a doctor recruitment committee. And I think this is equally as important to our ratepayers.
Thank you, Councilor Barfoot. I in no way was trying to imply that we need two members on this committee. All I was suggesting was the two people that indicated they would like to sit on the committee would attend at least the first meeting together to gather all their information they can, and then bring it back to council. That's the only reason why I was suggesting it. So it's up to council here to make the decision. Do we want to amend the motion to put Councilor Sullivan and Deputy Mayor Carlton on it to attend a meeting at this time? Is that what we're going to do, Madam Clerk?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, the appointments will not be formalized until we do so by bylaw. So by appointing the Deputy Mayor and Councillor Sutherland to the committee here this evening, we're not formalizing their appointment. So if it is council's wish that both members attend to do the investigative work, they can then report back to council, likely with the entirety of the committee, with an updated terms of reference, at which time we can decide if both members need to remain on the committee or if we would like to revert back to the one.
Is council agreeable to what the clerk has suggested? Show of hands. Madam Clerk, we'll change the motion accordingly.
So procedurally, I need a mover for the amendment.
Moved by Councillor Colburn, second by Councillor Pringle.
Thank you. And a vote on the amendment.
All in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Its motion is carried. Now we vote on the original amended motion. All in favor of the amended motion? Show of hands. Is carried. Opposed? The motion is carried. Okay. Moving on to finance. Next report. The recommendation is that the committee of the whole approve report FI1 2022-03-21, council remuneration expenses to fulfill the township's requirement under section 284 of the Municipal Act 2001. Someone to move to the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councillor Thompson. And Madam Treasurer, please go ahead.
Yes, so as stated in the recommendation, this report is to fulfill the township's requirement under section 284 of the Municipal Act, which states the treasurer of a municipality shall in each year on or before March 31st provide to the council an itemized statement on remuneration and expenses paid in the previous year. I will can take any questions if there are.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. Does council have any questions on this motion before us? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? The motion is carried. Moving on with our agenda, we're down to our next recommendation. Still in finance. The policy FIN 01-2022 Township Donation Policy be approved and be amended for the 2023 budget year. Someone to move to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Sullivan, second by Deputy Mayor Carlton. Madam Treasurer, please go ahead.
So this report is a follow-up to the initial policy that was presented to Council on June 9th, 2021, where Council had directed staff to inquire and provide a bit more information. This report outlines that information. I'm welcome any questions.
Does Council have any questions on the report? Councillor Colburn, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay, Samantha? I read this a few days ago, so I have forgotten. I wonder if you could remind us, what is it that our municipality provides in terms of swimming lessons, and where, and how do we get that word out to our ratepayers to make sure they know that it's available?
So I may be incorrect, but to my knowledge, there are no swimming lessons that are done within the Township of Georgian Bluffs limits. We do pay to Wyerton $100, I believe, per participant of their swimming program that lives within Georgian Bluffs. Just we need their direction on how many residents participate in that program.
Go ahead, Councillor Colburn.
And so that's the Wyerton pool. What about Owen Sound?
At this time, there is no agreement to my knowledge with Owen Sound for swimming.
Madam Treasurer, may I just ask a question? Sorry, Councillor Colburn. The township donated $650,000 towards a new complex, and the main purpose of donating that money was because the township couldn't provide swimming pools in our township. And I assume any ratepayer in the Georgian Bluffs could join. Am I correct in saying that, Madam Clerk?
Our residents can join the Owen Sound YMCA, yes.
If I may, just to add the clarity I think you're looking for, that is separate from a sports subsidy program.
Yeah.
The sports subsidy program is through Wyerton. There is not one through Owen Sound.
Councillor Colburn?
So sorry, I'm just going to be blunt. Why do we not have that for Owen Sound when so many of our population would be using that service close by? Not only is swimming recreational, but it's also a life-saving measure. So I'm just wondering why, in its current form, we're limiting it so much just to the one facility. And can we look at that going forward?
Does anyone want to, Madam CEO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, staff can take that away and review with our programming staff. And I have an upcoming meeting with the CAO from Owen Sound, so I can have that conversation.
And I guess a question to you, Madam CEO, is that a Y is run by a Y board, not by the City of Owen Sound?
That would be correct, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions of council? Deputy Mayor Carlton.
Just one question concerning, there's a deadline in there that anyone wanting to receive a donation from the township has to apply by a certain date. What happens in the event an event comes up after that date? Can they still apply and have it brought forward in front of council for special consideration? Or is everybody restricted to that timeline?
Madam Treasurer, can you answer that?
I would recommend that we try to stick to that deadline as much as possible to ensure fairness among all organizations within the township that may be running events. I do understand that some may come up last minute that are requesting donations, and I would ask the clerk kind of what our procedures in that case would be.
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So procedurally, any piece of correspondence that a resident requests to be brought forward to council will be included on an agenda, including those that may be last minute donation requests that our treasurer has mentioned. But it would be staff's intention and the recommendation to council that we try and observe the deadlines as much as possible.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Does that answer your question? Councilor Barfoot, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Always in the past, we used to, they just do not automatically, because they got it last year, they do not automatically get it this year. So do we still request a written something writing requesting the donation? Because I don't want people to get comfortable just because you got it last year, you're getting it this year and next year.
Madam Treasurer, please go ahead.
So there is that statement within the policy that although you received funding in the previous year, it is not guaranteed. I would ask that council evaluates it every year or the next year. That previous year funding is not a guarantee, and we would not be a continual funding source for any program.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Barfoot.
Sorry. In the past, we've had groups come to council and request funding for this or funding for that. Where do you draw the line? Because some municipalities, they don't participate in a program like that. What bothers me is when somebody comes requesting funding and I find out, first of all, they're getting funding from the Lions Club, a provincial agency. You know, double dipping is fine, but I think you've got to be fair too. So how do we differentiate which would be on the A list?
Madam Treasurer, are you able to answer that?
If you can just bear with me for one moment, I want to take another look at the policy because I believe I did have the requirement to provide the information about separate funding sources. So I just want to confirm that.
Please, we'll wait.
If I may, Sam, I have it open. One of the requirements on the application is what other sources of funding are used by your organization to provide its services. So that is indicated on the application.
Well, that's good. That takes care of it. Great. Is there any other questions on this motion before us? Seeing none, a show of hands, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? The motion is carried. Moving along, public question period. Madam Clerk, is there any? No? Okay. Unfinished business, none. New business? Seeing none. Any notice of motions from a council member? Seeing none. We're now down to closed session. I'll read the recommendation. The council move into closed session at 5:55 p.m. in the council chambers with the CEO, Director of Corporate Services, Clerk, and Township Integrity Commissioners, Principal Integrity, remain in the room to discuss 1, personal matters about identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employee, Integrity Commissioner referral report. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Deputy Mayor Carlton, second by Councilor Barfoot. Is there any discussion on motion before us? Seeing none. Show of hands, all in favor? The motion is carried. Madam Clerk, we are now in closed session. Are we ready, council?
Hold on.
Carol? You ready to go back?
While we're all back in open session, if you can please enable the live stream.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We are now back to open session. Committee moved into closed session to discuss matters under closed meeting exemption B of section 239 of the Municipal Act, specifically to consider a referral report presented by Township Integrity Commissioner, Principal Integrity. No action was taken as a result of closed discussions. We have no other business here tonight. Our next meeting is March 16th. If we have no other business here tonight, I ask for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Pringle, second by Councilor Sutherland. There's no discussion. Show of hands, all in favor of adjournment. Motion is carried. Thanks, everybody. It's a good night.